Today we are going to look into what is considered one of the world's most successful parasites, the protozoan Toxoplasma gondii. We're going to take a look at the research and history as well as the folklore and other phenomena that we might be able to link to this protozoan parasite. We are going to invert the host-parasite relationship as kind of the general hypothesis or conclusion that the agency of a host is directed by parasites rather than the host is simply being influenced, which obviously means there is a lot to consider. This is just one single parasite and its life cycle, its intentions, and its modulation of host. So we're going to start by just taking a look at a lot of the research. To begin, this is medical microbiology. And Chapter 84 is about Toxoplasma gondii. So we can go into the structure and lifestyle, the pathogenesis, host defense, epidemiology, diagnosis, control, all kinds of stuff like that. Members of the cat family are the definitive hosts. Many mammals and birds serve as intermediate hosts. Infection is contracted by ingesting either oocysts or meat containing live organisms. Organisms enter the intestinal epithelium and can spread to many host tissues. They're obviously very tiny. They're a single-celled protozoan. It produces sexually only in cats. Organisms infecting the intestinal epithelium produce oocysts, which are shed in the feces. T Gondii is probably one of the most extensively studied parasites in the world. You can certainly take a look at all of the information yourself, which is why I'm doing it in this format. I'll just be highlighting certain points. Toxoplasma gondii infection in humans is widespread throughout the world. Approximately 500 million humans have antibodies. It's thought up to a third of the world's population has Toxoplasma gondii in them. Infection occurs commonly in many animals used for food, for example, sheep, goats, pigs, and rabbits. Infection is less prevalent in cattle than in sheep or pigs. Oocytes are shed by cats, not only the domestic cat, but other big cats. The oocyst formation is greatest in the domestic cat. Widespread natural infection is possible because a cat may excrete millions of oocysts after ingesting few tissue cysts. They are resistant to most ordinary environmental conditions and can survive in moist conditions for months or even years. Other invertebrates may spread them mechanically. Only a few cats may be involved at any one time in spreading T Gondii. In an area, at any given time, as little as 1% of the domestic cat population in the United States is shedding oocysts. So very little actually spread oocysts or shed oocysts, but when they do, they can be excreting millions of them. It is estimated that 25 to 30% of the world's population is infected with Toxoplasma. In the United States, 89% of women in the childbearing age are susceptible to have an acute infection and are at risk for transmitting the parasite to the baby if the primary infection occurs during the gestational period. Nearly one-third of the 7.25 billion people on Earth, including an estimated 60 million people in the United States, are chronically infected with the protozoan Toxoplasma gondii. That estimate's probably a little low. As you can see, this estimate is closer to 30 to 50% of the people in the world are infected with Toxoplasma. So it's not always very deadly. A successful parasite's not always trying to destroy its host. It's to the benefit of the parasite that the host survives in order to spread the parasite. They can damage the brain, nervous system, and eyes when they do become infectious, or when they do lead to diseases. But now there is growing evidence that maybe a lot of people have subtler symptoms triggered by the infection. Perhaps the human response, while keeping the parasites in check, causes collateral damage elsewhere. Or maybe the parasites, which produce the neurotransmitter dopamine and interact with the cells it affects, modifies behavior of its host. So they are quite ubiquitous. And we are learning that even if there's no symptoms of toxoplasmosis disease, they will affect the host in some ways. The production of neurotransmitter dopamine is very important. Documented human cases of a disease called toxoplasmosis go as far back as ancient Egypt. They found them in mummies. This video, it's about 5 minutes long. I would just play it on here, but I would probably get taken for copyright. So you can check it out. It's going to summarize a fair bit of what I'm going to be talking about in the kind of research side of things. So it's worth checking out just for a quick overview of things. So this goes into the history of it, of just the discovery of it, the naming of it, and just learning about its life cycle, and just exactly how pervasive it is in the world. Early passage of Toxoplasma gondii across the blood-brain barrier. So this is just studying into how it can kind of get into the CNS. Infections, again, can occur by contaminated food and water, from a pregnant mother to the developing fetus. Basically stays latent in the body. So even if there's no symptoms, it's not necessarily trying to lead to symptoms. Here it says, after entering the intestinal tract, T Gondii rapidly disseminates systemically to ultimately establish latent infection in the CNS. Early studies in rodents established that orally ingested tissue cysts or oocysts invade the intestinal tissue and differentiate into tachyzoids that rapidly reach the peripheral blood circulation. This parasite knows what it's doing. It gets into the very control center of the host. T Gondii can evolve once it completes its life cycle in a new definitive host. This was observed from studies conducted with mice, which demonstrated that the intermediate host develops neophobic behavior and avoids new stimuli. Basically, it's influencing its host to help it produce or to help it finish its life cycle, and interacting with the host genes and the parasite genes, characterizing a behavioral manipulation and conferring a selective advantage to T Gondii. In other words, T Gondii is an opportunistic parasite for humans and other animals. This article is an adaptive and genetic evolution of Toxoplasma gondii, a host-parasite interaction. So now we're going to get into some of its behavioral influences. There's a correlation in sexual behavior with Toxoplasma gondii. Influence aspects of the host's behavior. Does Toxoplasma infection increase sexual masochism and submissiveness? Yes or no? So this is going more into the studies of it. Also, again, important, we must also accept the fact that any single factor usually explains only a small fraction of variability in the focal variable. That the most spectacular behavioral effect of Toxoplasma in rodent hosts is the so-called fatal attraction phenomenon, the change of native fear of the smell of cats into attraction to their scent among individuals infected by the parasite. This is so that the rodent can get eaten by the cat and allow the parasite to complete its life cycle. As we said, it gets right into the dopamine production and changes the association of the cat urine to something positive and sexually attractive to the rats, so that they will approach the rat and get eaten. And so similar things have been noticed in humans. It is not clear whether such mechanisms is just a byproduct of neuroanatomical constraints. Possibly it is easier to achieve coactivation of the fear-related and sexual arousal-related circuits by specific stimuli in a mammal brain than to achieve an inhibition of the activation of the fear-related circuits by such stimuli. So you can check out this study. It is certainly not fully figured out. There just seems to be, for some reason, it can influence certain attractions. So body height, body mass index, waist-hip ratio, fluctuating asymmetry, and second to fourth digit ratio in subjects with latent toxoplasmosis. The results suggest that some of the observed differences between infected and non-infected subjects may have existed before infection and could be caused by the lower natural resistance to toxoplasma infection in subjects with higher prenatal testosterone levels. Between 20 and 60% of the population of most countries are infected with the protozoan Toxoplasma gondii. Subjects with clinically asymptomatic lifelong latent toxoplasmosis differ from those who are toxoplasma-free in several behavioral parameters. Case control studies cannot decide whether these differences already existed before infection or whether they were induced by the presence of toxoplasma in the brain of infected hosts. Here we searched for such morphological differences between toxoplasma-affected and toxoplasma-free subjects that could be induced by the parasite: body weight, body height, BMI, waist-hip ratio, or could rather correlate with their natural resistance to parasitic infection. We found toxoplasma-infected men to be taller and toxoplasma-infected men and women to have lower 2D ratio, 4D ratios, previously reported to be associated with higher prenatal testosterone levels. There's quite a few studies into this, and they have mixed results. Again, there's a lot of factors that go into this, but you can check out some of these and just kind of look at where the research is at. Is Toxoplasma gondii infection related to brain and behavior impairments in humans? Evidence from a population representative birth cohorts. Infected individuals are commonly asymptomatic, though recent reports have suggested that infection might influence aspects of the host behavior. In particular, Toxoplasma infection has been linked to schizophrenia, suicide attempt, differences in aspects of personality, and poorer neurocognitive performance. However, these studies are often conducted in clinical samples or convenience samples. Here's another study by Frontiers. This paper is a detailed review of the associations between T Gondii, suicidal behavior a field study that started 15 years ago with our publication of associations between T Gondii and suicidal behavior. And they were just checking out all the different stuff related to it. Are Toxoplasma infected subjects more attractive, symmetrical, or healthier than non-infected ones? Evidence from subjective and objective measurements. Parasites are among the main factors that negatively impact the health and reproductive success of organisms. However, if parasites diminish a host's health and attractiveness to such an extent that finding a mate becomes almost impossible, the parasite would decrease its odds of reproducing and passing to the next generation. There is evidence that Gondii manipulates phenotypic characteristics of its intermediate hosts to increase its spread. However, whether Gondii manipulates phenotypic characteristics in humans remains poorly studied. Therefore, the present research had two main aims: to compare traits associated with health and parasite resistance in T. Gondii infected and non-infected subjects, to investigate whether other people perceive differences in attractiveness and health between Toxoplasma infected and non-infected subjects of both sexes. Our results suggest that some sexually transmitted parasites, such as T. Gondii, may produce changes in the appearance and behavior of the human host, either as a byproduct of the infection or as a result of the manipulation of the parasite to increase its spread to new hosts. Taken together, these results lay the foundation for future research on the manipulation of the human host by sexually transmitted pathogens and parasites. Essentially, it is to the benefit of the parasite if the host or the intermediate host is able to share a lot of contact with other humans. This is going into the effects on human behavior. Generally, the demonstration that latent Toxoplasma infections can alter behavior in rodents has led to a reconsideration of this assumption. When infected human adults were compared with uninfected adults on personality questionnaires, several differences were found. Possible mechanisms by which T. Gondii may affect human behavior include its effects on dopamine and on testosterone. Here's another study, pretty much reiterating a lot of what all those other studies were saying. First, we found that infected men had lower facial fluctuating asymmetry, whereas infected women had lower BMI. A tendency for lower facial fluctuating asymmetry, higher self-perceived attractiveness, and a higher number of sexual partners than non-infected ones. The parasite is trying to make the host spread as much as it can, and if it has to increase attractiveness, it will do that. And there is the chance that it's associated with higher risk behavior and more violent sexual preferences, because again, it's trying to spread, and that is certainly one way that would do it. Not the only cause, remember, but it is a possible agency for cause. So this study is looking into the spinal cord pathology in Toxoplasma gondii infection. Obviously, the implications for humans is there. The study was experimenting or looking into mice. Investigations with a larger sample size of different population groups should be performed to evaluate multiple factors. So what they found was that in many traffic accidents, I believe there was a large percentage of them involved in traffic accidents and other risky behavior had Toxoplasma gondii. And this is going into that potential cause for risk behavior. A correlation between maternal toxoplasmosis and the risk of having autistic children was reported in 2017. Thus, a relationship between maternal toxoplasmosis and the damage of nuclear and mitochondrial DNA in child autism may exist. For example, one study found that it could be associated with increased aggression in women and increased impulsivity in younger men. During chronic infection, the single-celled parasite can migrate to the brain where it has been associated with altered dopamine function and the capacity to modulate host behavior, increasing risk of neurocognitive disorders. So this study was looking into electromagnetic fields. They help to suppress the immune system, increasing the risk for opportunistic infection. So they were looking at certain aspects of the immune function that can be interrupted by electromagnetic frequency, which could lead to different kinds of infections: bacterial, viral, fungal, parasitic, things like toxoplasmosis, listeria, Epstein-Barr virus. Furthermore, numerous research studies have shown that man-made electromagnetic fields have the potential to open voltage-gated calcium channels, which can in turn produce a pathological increase of intercellular calcium, leading downstream to the pathological production of a series of reactive oxygen species. It's hypothesized here that exposures to electromagnetic fields have the potential to inhibit immune system response by means of an eventual pathological increase in the influx of calcium into the cytoplasm of the cell. Basically, it leads to immunosuppression, which in turn leads to a weakened immune system and an increase in opportunistic infection. So I do wonder if things like TV, computer, phone exposure can be used or taken advantage of by parasites, since they can access that dopamine to give you dopamine while you're spending so much time on the computer. So it only increases their infection, and probably especially in younger kids, where if they have a chronic infection of something like T Gondii, it will provide dopamine for when they're using those or interacting with those electromagnetic frequencies, and thus leading to aggression if they don't have access to their computers anymore. Why were cats so popular on the internet? If we're taking a look at the main host of this parasite, it is cats. There's already studies, the video I was talking about at the beginning, there's studies into why do we love cats? Why did we even domesticate cats? Could there have been that parasite as a agent in the very domestication of cats, both in the evolution, the coevolution of cats evolving to manipulate humans, as well as humans domesticating them, right? It's not so much a one-sided interaction, it is multi-sided, and the parasites could have played a role in that, in making humans want to be around cats, and perhaps even making the cats want to be around humans. Especially probably because cats were used to control rodents. So you've pretty much got the perfect setup for the Toxoplasma Gondii. Humans build cities, and they leave a lot of garbage behind and sewage, and this is going to bring rats and mice and other rodents. To control that, you're going to need cats. It's sort of the perfect setting for these parasites. So it becomes to their benefit that cats and humans get along. There's a lot of folklore, and they were considered sacred in many ways by different cultures, especially the Egyptians. It's a fair question to ask if there was a role in the parasite and that idea of cats being sacred and associated with magic and folklore, since that has largely been the theme of this channel, is to take a look into how the microbial is the spiritual. For better or for worse, right? It's simply what it is. But we'll get more into that in a second. So a lot of cat lore that had to do with cats being evil or associated with death or demons had to do with babies. Here they'll steal your baby's breath. They like to feast upon newborn babies. They're urns for human souls. They haunt different roadsides, and they can transfer their faces to unborn babies. They work for the devil. Lots of those different folklores persisted, but might that be some subconscious understanding of the role of Toxoplasma Gondii, since the most dangerous time for a human to be around this parasite is a pregnant woman. So it makes sense that a lot of the folklore and the negative associations with cats would be specifically about babies and mothers. That seems to exactly coincide with the studies into Toxoplasma Gondii and babies, both in how it develops their characteristics and infant death. Another interesting aspect is supposedly a lot of anime is inspired to mimic cats, since it appears psychologically that there is a positive association with cats and humans. Again, could this be from the Toxoplasma gondii altering people's values in behaviors and what they find attractive or what they find pleasant to look at? Here again, in England, it was believed for centuries that cats were capable of climbing into an infant's crib and sucking its breath until death succumbs it. Well, sure, maybe that happened directly, but I think those legends are probably more subconsciously aware of the association that the cat could, as a byproduct of its parasite, to cause the death of the infant. And maybe the parasite does induce in the cat subconsciously in the same way that it can affect our behavior, can affect the cat's behavior. Especially since that is its primary host. You'd expect it to have the most manipulation in the primary host in terms of kind of its background evolution. In us, we can see that it adapts the host rapidly to have the best chance, but in the cat, it is probably already long established that relationship. Yeah, there's a very rich history in folklore and religion with the role of cats. Cat shape-shifting, cats associated with magic and shamanism and all sorts of things like that could certainly be influenced by the parasite. And I certainly think it's worth speculating that if the parasite can affect certain phenotypic characteristics, could it make a cat look more human-like or make a human look more cat-like, since those are two host organisms that it jumps and spreads between. Another phenomena is cats predicting or acting strangely or near the death of different people, sometimes especially their owner. That was the case for Winston Churchill. His cat acted oddly around his death. And it's also been noticed that cats can predict their own death. Like anything, it's complex. This is not to say that everything associated with the cat is just this specific parasite. There could be connections between a cat with Toxoplasma gondii and a human, its owner, with Toxoplasma gondii, and having some sort of extrasensory or some sort of communication system between the parasites from host to host, whether it's some maybe chemical, hormonal, electromagnetic ability to sense, or whether because it can influence the neurotransmitters of its hosts, that it too is sort of downloading information gained from the host. It certainly seems they are able to be aware of things going on. We hear the phrase collective unconsciousness. It's not necessarily a collective consciousness between humans, but it could be a collective consciousness, the collective of the microbiome. Why are cats so deeply related to or associated with spirituality? Is there a part of that could have been under the agency of the Toxoplasma gondii? They're associated with witches, black magic, good luck, bad luck, the devil, history of the domestication. You can read about that. There's also this idea that the universe provides you with a cat, that paranormal, paranatural ability that cats just end up in your life. Well, if we understand this sort of fatal attraction phenomena, the parasite could be kind of influencing that serendipity, since its goal is to spread. The history of house cats just seems that we should be looking at the microbial when we're taking a look at the domestication, as these are open systems. An organism is an open system, it's an ecosystem, and it's interacting with other things. And those things have a lot going on. It certainly would take a while to find all the factors and everything. But it is probably easiest to start with the one that's the most widespread and go from there. There's no good or evil in nature, right? Certainly you don't want to be sick, but it seems that many of the people who do get sick, who probably already have a natural talent or interest in something, they seem to always be very, very skilled at that thing. Albert Einstein, Edwin Hubble, Isaac Newton, Nikola Tesla, they all had cats, and many of them exhibited different health problems or peculiar mental illnesses. Could it have been Toxoplasma gondii? Certainly it could have been. There's, I think, a case to be made for that. And the ability of that parasite to enter the subconscious, to affect the neurotransmitters, and this is going to give you different sorts of inspiration, different ideas. If your subconscious is different, that place where you get ideas is going to be different. And there's all kinds of different authors, from Sylvia Plath to Stephen King, who have famously had cats, and might there be some of that latent Toxoplasma gondii affecting their subconscious. Again, this is not meant to judge, or this is not saying it's bad. This is just to identify the possibility, to inspect whether or not microorganisms are the real agency behind the subconscious and the spiritual and all these other phenomena, for better or for worse. It's just an observation. Here's some more authors. Not included in this are Edgar Allan Poe and H.P. Lovecraft, both very sick people leaders in their respective fields with great influence. It seems to get ideas from an unknown aspect, which we might be able to infer as the parasites. It's certainly part of a trend where people who are sick tend to have a lot of crazy ideas, and when they're skilled and creative and work towards that, they seem to be able to access just a way of thinking that is not considered normal or that is not human. Anything that enters the human microbiome and has that much influence is going to alter the evolution. It's going to alter the culture, the background sort of consciousness. Some speculation into the implications of Toxoplasma gondii and its formation of the human microbiome and its evolutionary effects and its possible relation to ancient folklore and ancient domestication, as well as how we think, what we view as attractive cultural trends. What is the agency behind these things? A combination of many things, certainly, but we might be able to slowly piece together a definitive answer if we can understand fully a certain specific microorganisms, and then we can measure that with other microorganisms and just continue to break down all of the possible effects, even on the subconscious spiritual level, or what is considered or expressed as spiritual is really what's happening in the background of these parasites or microorganisms that are able to induce in us different neurotransmitter effects. It is a lot to take in, so again, this is just to inspect and observe information and speculate. So thanks for watching, and peace out.